Last year, while my team and I were traveling around the world shooting our documentary No Farmers, No Food, we stopped by the Netherlands in order to speak with the farmers there. Those farmers, those Dutch farmers, they were feeling the brunt of the European government's goal of saving the planet. Because as a practical matter, the Dutch government's plan would cause something like 30 to upwards of 45% of these farmers to have to give up their land. And so, in order to get a more complete picture of why this was happening, the true reason for why these globalist policies were pushing out these farmers, and also to figure out how come when we dug into the specific policies, none of them seemed to make any sense, well, we had the opportunity to sit down and speak with a Dutch political commentator named Eva Vlaardingerbroek. And she broke down for us quite succinctly how, at least in her view, the whole nitrogen crisis is only a smokescreen to cover up a massive power grab. Take a listen. Eva, the first question I had is, how is it that in this environment of the Ukraine-Russia war, when people are already starting to talk about global food crises, the leaders of many countries are predicting actual food shortages happening around the world, how is it that all of a sudden, well, at least seemingly all of a sudden to people outside of the country, the Dutch government decided to propose a policy that will put somewhere between 30 to 50% of the farmers out of business? How did that happen?
The only answer I have to it is that it's about control. So this is apparently something that they want. I don't see any other explanation. If you go forward with these types of plans in a time of, well, known food shortages on the horizon, then the only thing I can see in that is intent. Mm-hmm. And the only reason that I could see a government do that is because they could gain control from it. Mm-hmm. Because what better way to control people than to control what they eat and when they can eat? Mm-hmm. So I don't have another answer to that than that it's intentional, sadly.
So you're saying it's about control, but can you go a little bit deeper on that? How does the government actually gain control by putting all these farmers out of work?
So obviously there's an agenda against meat in general. It's cattle farm that they're trying to come after, and there's a global agenda pushing for us to eat insects, but also eating fake meat produced by people like Bill Gates, for example. There are some ties also with Bill Gates and the Dutch government that are, I think, very interesting to mention. If you decide what people eat and if there are food shortages, for example, what could happen is that they introduce some sort of food stamp system. Mm-hmm. That's thinkable. That would obviously be a digital one, wouldn't be like back in the World War where, you would get paper ones. They would say, no, we're going to use a digital system for it this time because that would prevent it from being fraudulent. People can't have each other's or steal each other's stamps. It would be personally related to your ID. So it would all tie together with the digital identity that they are setting up right now. Mm-hmm. Because all of this comes from institutions that are trying to push for that type of digital global identity anyway. Mm-hmm. So that's, for example, a way that I could see that this would happen. They could do that with food stamps, but they could do it, for example, with energy as well. So obviously we're also having an energy crisis, mm-hmm. and they would use terms as equal distribution of wealth, equal distribution of energy, equal distribution of foods. Mm-hmm. So those are things that you could do as a government to control your people once food scarcity hits. And well, I don't know how bad it's going to get, but it's definitely something that apparently they don't mind, at least, mm-hmm. happening. So
I spoke to a lot of farmers, and maybe half a dozen of them explained to me this technology that they could implement on their farms to sort of separate the cow poop from the cow urine, which would solve the quote-unquote nitrogen problem. However, they told me that the government is not even having any kind of talks about them regarding this new technology. The only sort of direction of the conversation is to take their land and to get them out of business and to have them sell the land to the government. What do you make of that? Do you think that sort of signifies that this nitrogen issue is only on the surface and there's something else going on behind the scenes?
It's a pretext, of course. Yeah, I've always said that the nitrogen crisis is, first of all, a made-up crisis. It's manufactured in order for them to seize the land. Mm-hmm. So they've been doing this for a long time. This is not the first time that they've come after the Dutch farmers. They've done it already in 2019, and it always goes in small steps. So they start with saying, you need reform. Then they came with the first plan, of course, before the summer. Then they stalled it again. Now there's a new plan where they say we're going to get the peak polluters first. So that would mean that 600 of those farmers will go out of business within the next year. And the only solution that is ever being proposed is forced expropriation. So it is the government that will take hold of their land. There's no other. It's not like, oh, you have to stop producing or you sell your land on the market. No, it's the government that will take the land. So that is the ultimate goal. And there are multiple reasons for why they want the land, of course, but the fact that there is no freedom in that shows you that the government so desperately wants to get their land. And the nitrogen crisis is just something that they're using, I think, because people, you know, are susceptible to the idea that there is some sort of crisis that they need to do something for in sort of the benefit of the greater good.
Yeah.
Like with COVID, you know, a crisis that then they present a solution for, and the solution is always ordinary people, or in this case, farmers, who are going to have to give up their rights and their property. It's the same tactic every single time.
What do you think some of the reasons are for the government trying to take the land from the farmers?
So there are multiple. I think that, first of all, you know, there is definitely, this is part of a sort of great reset idea, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Farmers are independent people. They produce food. Like I said, there is a correlation between food and control. So if you have a large group of people that is basically relatively independent of the government, then those people are not very easy to control. They produce the food supply. On a larger scale, then you get to control not just the farmers, but also the population. So in and of itself, a profession like farming is something that kind of is contrary to the agenda that they have for us, I feel like. So it's definitely that. And then there is the fact that we have a housing crisis in the Netherlands. As you know, this is a very tiny country. We have a lot of people, and we have a growing population because of immigration. And we need places to house those immigrants, and I think that that's partly why the government wants that land. They need houses, and they need to build houses, which is funny because apparently building houses is also what emits nitrogen, but that's not the people they're coming after. They're coming specifically after the farmers because they want the land.
So that's one question I had. So they're going to take the land from these farmers because, at least the surface reason, is that because they're too close to the nature preserves, these nature areas that they want to preserve and have certain types of plants thrive, and too much nitrogen would hurt those plants. But then you're saying that the end goal is to then build housing units on that land. That won't hurt the nature preserves?
It shows you, once again, we have to kind of take ourselves out of the narrative that the government represents, because it isn't logical. None of it is logical. Now, the new plan where they say we're going to get those peak polluters, they're not looking at the actual soil itself. They're just looking at, okay, how much nitrogen do these people emit? And if you are in a larger category or in a higher category, we're going to take your land first. So there is no willingness to really talk about the facts, because this is not about nitrogen. So that is every single time proven by the way that the government behaves and by the way that they present themselves in this debate. It's a pretext. So logical questions that you're asking here won't, you know, be answered by the government with logic, because they're lying about what their actual motive is.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment, I'd like to introduce the sponsor of today's episode, Freedom 2.0. Let's roll the clip.
What's up, everybody? This is Anthony Watson, contributor for Turning Point USA and now Happy Deplorable. And here, as an Olympian that is now working for Turning Point, all of these good ideas require hydration. But not with that garbage. I'm talking about this, Freedom 2.0, the new water and new sponsor of Turning Point USA that not only allows you to exercise creativity, but have good hydration in the process. What's up, ladies? Hey! Now, with everybody else that is not only protecting freedom of speech, you can actually do it in everything that you drink right now. So, it's not just a creative concept, it's also something that you can drink and taste. So get yours at freedom20.com.
You can try it for yourself over at freedom20.com and use promo code Roman to save 15% off. Again, that's promo code Roman for 15% off. So can you explain to an American audience who might not understand what the dynamics of the Netherlands, this housing crisis, what is causing it? Is it that there's too many Dutch people and they're expanding too quickly?
Yeah, what's funny is ever since I've been saying this, that this is because of partly immigration, that we need houses. People have been saying, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Recently, the Dutch state-funded media said that I was promoting the Great Replacement Theory, a racist Great Replacement Theory, by stating that the Dutch government needs land for immigrants. it's simple math. The Dutch population is not growing because the native Dutch people are having a ton of babies. Actually, we're a shrinking society, just like any other Western country, basically, because we're not having babies. But the immigrants that are coming to our country at fast rates, and have been coming to our country at fast rates for a decade or decades now, and our borders are open, wide open. So the only reason that the Dutch population is growing and that we need more houses is because of immigration. So you can call that a conspiracy theory all you want, but I call it simple math. And that's the reason why they need new houses. And like I said, it's not just, I think, because of the new houses. I think it's also because of what farmers represent, and that food is a really good way to control your people. So it is. I think there are multiple motives for our government to seize the land.
Is there any talk within Parliament that you know of? I'm sure you follow it very closely, and you used to be there yourself. Is there any talk about the ramifications that this would have on the economy? Because I imagine you put all these farmers out of work. That'll destroy the tax revenue that they bring in. But it's not just the farmers. All the truck drivers, the cheese makers, the slaughterhouses, even the restaurants. Like it's a whole ecosystem of that farming represents. If that goes out the window, like, is there any talks about what that would actually do to the economy here?
I don't think so. I mean, the Netherlands is, like you said, the second largest exporter of agricultural products in the world. We're a tiny, tiny country. It's a big market for us. But I don't think that that's something that they care about all that much. And that is reflected in basically all of the policies that our government has. They're spending 60 billion euros on the climate transition. They're spending 70 billion euros every year on immigration. If it was about protecting our economy, they would be basically doing the opposite of what they are doing right now. So I think if there's anything that our government is basically wants is to have our economy destroyed. It's what they did with the lockdowns as well. And printing money into oblivion definitely hasn't helped. Our inflation numbers are at the highest they've been since the World War. 17.5%, I think, now.
So even from a practical perspective, I can imagine, like, if you do that, that'll create a massive amount of social unrest. Right, if you devastate the economy like that, even if you print money into oblivion, I mean, the inflation rate will just continue expanding. So there's no talks about that at all.
Well, the civil unrest is something that they try to, I think, to vilify, basically through the media. So what they're doing with the farmers since the beginning is they'll have the mainstream media, of course, come in and say, those farmers are non-cooperative people. This is a climate crisis. You need to have answers for all of this. And, they're just not willing to have dialogue or to look at solutions. Basically, the government is now saying, we are just going to stick to these 2030 agenda plans, because that's what it is. They're holy, they even said. And this new report shows that once again. They're not giving an inch whatsoever. And I think the strategy is to do that for as long as they possibly can, so that, first of all, the farmers will get exhausted. They're going to be tired because it would cost them a lot of money, I guess, to be away from their businesses all the time and to protest, and to then at the same time have the mainstream media influence the public opinion on the farmers by just pushing and pushing and pushing false narratives and hateful statements about the farmers, because that's what they've been doing. They're trying to vilify these people and also to shame everyone who would support them. And I think that's the strategy. So the more time they can take to confuse people, to use nice words and different pretexts to just kind of like change the vocabulary on what they're doing, because that's basically the only thing they do, to just confuse people, to divide and conquer a little bit, but still push the same agenda and stick to it as much as they can. That is, I think, the strategy that they're hoping and going for, so that the public opinion will shift and they can go forward with it.
So you mentioned the Great Reset and Agenda 2030. Maybe to somebody who's watching this who maybe has never heard about it, or maybe they've just seen those words on the horizon a little bit. Can you explain it to them what that actually is? What does that actually look like?
Right, of course. So the reason why I'm saying that these plans are part of that agenda is because it's even in the names. They said we need to have this nitrogen crisis fixed before 2030. There's a reason for that. And that is that the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals that are part of the United Nations agenda, that is again connected to the standards set by the World Economic Forum, and Klaus Schwab, sort of the mastermind of that organization, has an idea for our world that he's very open about, called the Great Reset. He said that COVID was a perfect means to an end in that sense, of basically changing the way that our lives look and the way that our economy and our world functions. So small to medium businesses will be gone, will be out. Everything will be mass produced on a global scale, basically working towards global governance. And having, like I said, a very strong subgroup in society that is independent, that provides food for people locally through, well, for example, the cattle farms and by agriculture, that is something that would stand in the way of that. So they need to have control over the food supply through what they call hubs, food hubs, where food will be distributed, and they will say in an equal and fair manner that is good for the climate and that is good for the population. So they will use all of these nice pretexts. You can see that also on the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. There are 30 goals, where they use all sorts of nice words like distribution of wealth, equality between the sexes, etc. And it all sounds really good, but if you see the way that they're trying to reach those so-called noble goals, it's always through more government control and governments that work together on a supranational level. So that's also why not just Holland is now facing these types of regulations, but you can see the attack on farmers all over the world. It's not a coincidence. It's an agenda that is carried out on a global level, that is being pushed through government officials in respective countries. And we have a lot of people in our government that attend the meetings of organizations like the World Economic Forum and that even proudly wave the Sustainable Development flag, like our Minister of Health, for example. So there are a lot of ties. So you can't think or believe anymore that if you vote for someone on a local level or a national level, that they are there for just your national interests. They are at least very heavily influenced by an international one.
That's what I was wondering too. How specifically do these policies manifest? Because I know, after the World Economic Forum meetings every year, a bunch of clips come out from that meeting and circulate online of these like crazy agendas that they're always pushing, the microchips in medicine, the ones I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So how does that then manifest into actual concrete policy at the national level? And is it the case, like you mentioned, they attend the meetings and they're sort of ideologically aligned, and so they implement the policies because they sort of believe in the same worldview? Is that the case?
Yeah, at the very minimum, it is that. So, our prime minister will always say, oh, no, it's just like a meeting where we talk and we exchange ideas. Okay, that's fine. But if that is so influential, apparently, to what you believe the world should look like, and then you start to push those types of policies on a national level, then of course there is that. But there's also financial influence, of course. So when it comes to the European Union, there is financial influence there. There's a lot of money in these types of organizations, and pushing certain policies, having your friends on an international scale like you for the things that you do and promising you, for example, a job when you're done, which happens all the time. Those types of things can be good triggers, of course, for people to push for these goals. But it almost seems like, like they've forgotten about national interest because they don't really care about it. They care about something else.
Besides the protests that have been springing up for the last 3 years now and getting a lot of traction in the last year, is there any other type of pushback here in the Netherlands against this sort of agenda?
No, I would say that the farmers have been the most successful one, and that's, I think, why the government cracks down on them the hardest. Because, again, they're a powerful group. They have the means and the resources to also put up a real fight with their equipment. Like we've seen, they've blocked distribution centers, and within a couple of hours, you could see the effects of that. So they are quite literally a very powerful group in society. So by cracking down on them first, you get them out of the way. Obviously, for an American audience, I've talked about this plenty of times before, we don't have a Second Amendment. So our way of standing up against a tyrannical government is just by protesting. And you protest against a party that is armed, and you are unarmed. And we've seen very, very sad results of that already during the farmers' protest earlier this year, when they shot at a 16-year-old boy that was driving away from a protest. I don't want to say you're completely defenseless against a government with arms, but you're close to it. And the farmers, I think, are the largest and most well-organized group that can really put up a fight against the government, and they're trying. But obviously the mainstream media works very, very hard to vilify them for that reason. And I just hope that enough people will start to wake up to what is happening here, and that they see through the tactics, and that they don't get tired and, have it all dragged out to a point where they're like, oh, well, this is taking very long, or why are the farmers not cooperating more? But we shouldn't negotiate with people you don't negotiate with terrorists. And if you have a government that is going to take away your private property and force you out of existence, I don't know what is more terrifying than that. I think there should be no compromise at all, even though that is very much in the Dutch nature to want to compromise. Obviously, if a thief comes into your house, you're not going to say, can you just take my TV but not my computer? That's ridiculous. We should understand that the pretext of this, the whole fundament of the arguments that our governments are pushing are false. There is no nitrogen crisis. You shouldn't be taking away these farms. So non-negotiable. But the government's doing the opposite instead. They're sticking to their guns, and they're saying, no, these goals are holy. We're going to proceed with them, and they're doing it at an even faster rate now.
Every time I fly here to the Netherlands, I download a bunch of news articles in Dutch, and I translate them on a plane to read them to see what's going on. And they all present the same type of narrative, where it's like the farmers, as a group, are fighting against these good goals. They're like, the farmers, because of their personal interests, are fighting against the environment. They're fighting against the climate policies. They're fighting against this.
Yes.
It seems like what you mentioned is very, very key, in the where it's like they really are being divided. And it's like, well, this group is against this group. Because of their private interests, they're against the environment.
Yes.
Is there any kind of conservative movement in the Netherlands that's like rising up in the Netherlands?
No, that's the problem. We don't really have a strong conservative movement. So there are political parties, but I would never want to put all of my trust and all of my hope in the party system, because like always in Europe, any type of right-wing party that gets even in power, like for example in Sweden now, or gets a lot of votes, they are never actually allowed to form a coalition with other parties, because the more moderate parties exclude them anyway. So they never get into government unless they have such a big win, like in Italy, that there's no way around them at all. But in the Netherlands, when it comes to media, when it comes to civil movements, there really is nothing. There is nothing. And it pains me to say that, but that's probably the reason why it's so dire in this country. And now we are having to look to people who are not at all political, or just trying to live their lives and have their business thrive, like the farmers, to basically put up a fight against this policy and this agenda. So they've become a symbol of something. But there is sadly, I wouldn't say that there is a big conservative movement here that, has enough influence on the public to send them in the right direction, I suppose. So we're fighting a very, very hard fight.
So I guess my last question would be, do you have any hope that what the farmers are doing with their protests, and maybe there'll be more protests in the very near future after what happened today with the Remkes meeting, is that going to have an effect? Or is it going to be the case that these policies will go into effect, the price of food will rise, the amount of food will go down, the price of probably everything will rise, right? Because you have less exports, you have less foreign reserve currency cash that you can buy more things. So obviously everything will go high. You'll have a huge unemployment issue because that whole ecosystem is going out of business. And only then will the policy begin to shift and maybe even reverse course. What do you think will happen, the first or the second?
It depends how long they're going to be able to drag this out. So the government, by always using the nice pretext, saying that it's necessary because of crisis X that they've now come up with. Are people going to continue to buy that? Are they going to say, okay, yeah, this is not, something that is created, but this is something that is necessary and we need to do the right thing? And are they going to continue to be influenced by the mainstream media that is going to push that agenda and is going to vilify anybody who stands up against it? It could be. It could be, because they're working hard on it. Just today I saw another article come out of a manifesto of 80 celebrities in the Netherlands that took a stance for National Animals Day, which was yesterday, against the bio industry, the meat industry, because of the treatment of animals and how bad that is, and then obviously those types of things, I wouldn't even be surprised if that is again state funded. If there is some sort of government campaign behind that. They are banning meat advertisements in certain cities now. So it all works in tandem. It all works together. And the more they are going to be able to stall this and do a sort of boil the frog strategy, which I think is their strategy, probably the more people are going to be afraid to support the farmers and the longer it takes. And, they're going to present the farmers as the ones that are, again, not cooperative, who just want what they want. Because a lot of people still don't see that the agenda behind this is completely fraudulent. So if you really believe, like a lot of people sadly do, because that's the only thing they ever are told, that there is a climate crisis that needs to be solved by these things, then of course you're going to think, oh, maybe that should happen. And yeah, we can all eat a little bit less meat, that's not so bad. And everything else is just a horrible conspiracy theory spread by white supremacists like myself, because that is what the media tells them. And they don't come to think, hey, what would I do if the government would come into my house and would say, I'm going to take this house from you and you have no say in it? They don't seem to realize that that is quite literally what is happening to the farmers, and that will have terrible effects. So I don't know if it's going to be, if they're going to be successful at basically getting that message into the Dutch population's head and keeping it there, or whether enough people are going to wake up. What's also a possibility, of course, and that's, I think, one that they're aiming for, by creating, first of all, a fake crisis like the nitrogen one, but also crises that come from that, like poverty, like food shortages and economic faults and falls. You're going to have a lot of people in a very bad situation. This winter, the energy prices already are so incredibly high. A lot of people are going to quite literally be in the dark, be cold this winter. So if you have a population that is desperate enough, are they going to turn to the states, the ones who have done all of this, who are responsible for these crises, and ask them for help? Or are they going to wake up and see that the state did this to them? I don't know. I obviously hope it's the latter, and I'll be trying my hardest to make people see that all of this should and could have been avoided, but I'm not sure that it will be successful enough, because the machine that we're fighting against is a very strong and a very powerful one.
Well, Eva, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.